My father spent 18 years calling me stupid and told everyone I'd never amount to anything. He started begging when he found out how much I was making. My father started calling me stupid before I could even spell the word. I was 5 years old when I brought home my first report card, and he looked at it and shook his head. He said I would never amount to anything if this was the best I could do. I had all satisfactory marks. I was 5. That set the tone for the next 18 years of my life. Every test score was disappointing. Every grade was not good enough. Every achievement was dismissed as luck or low standards. My father had decided I was stupid, and nothing I did could change his mind. He said it so often it became background noise. "You're so stupid. How can you be this stupid? I can't believe I raised someone so stupid." He said it at dinner. He said it during homework. He said it in front of relatives and family friends and anyone who would listen. He told people I was the slow one in the family. He told my teachers to be patient with me because I wasn't the brightest. He told my younger brother that at least he got the brains in the family. My brother learned to call me stupid too because my father laughed when he did it. My mother never defended me. She said my father was just trying to motivate me. She said he wanted me to try harder and this was his way of pushing me. She said I was too sensitive and needed thicker skin. She said lots of parents talk to their kids this way, and I should be grateful he cared enough to have expectations. I didn't feel grateful. I felt small. I started believing him around age 12. I stopped raising my hand in class because I was afraid of giving wrong answers. I stopped trying new things because I assumed I would fail. I picked easy classes in high school because I didn't think I could handle difficult ones. I applied to average colleges because my father said no good school would want someone like me. I got into all of them and he said it was because standards had dropped. When I graduated high school, my father gave a toast at my party. He said he was proud of me for making it through despite my limitations. He said he hoped college wouldn't be too hard for me. He said maybe I should consider a trade instead since not everyone was cut out for academics. My relatives laughed uncomfortably. I smiled and said nothing. That was the last time I let his words define me. College was 4 hours away, and I finally had room to breathe. Without my father constantly telling me I was stupid, I started to realize maybe I wasn't. I took challenging classes and passed them. I joined study groups and contributed meaningfully. I made friends who thought I was smart and funny and worth knowing. I got on the dean's list my second semester. I called home to share the news, and my father said they probably curved the grades. I stopped calling home after that. I graduated with honors in engineering. My father didn't come to the ceremony because he said it was too far to drive for someone who probably wouldn't find a job anyway. I found a job before I even graduated. It paid more than my father made after 30 years at his company. I didn't tell him the salary. I just let him assume I was barely getting by like he expected. For the next 5 years, I built a life completely separate from my family. I got promoted twice. I bought a condo in a nice neighborhood. I started investing and watching my savings grow. I dated someone who respected my intelligence and challenged me in good ways. I read books and learned new skills and proved to myself over and over that my father was wrong about me. He never asked about my life during our rare phone calls. He just talked about my brother who still lived at home and couldn't hold a job. He talked about his own problems at work and his health issues and his complaints about the world. Sometimes he'd make comments about how I probably didn't understand what he was going through because I didn't have real responsibilities. I let him believe whatever he wanted. Then my brother needed money. He'd gotten into debt and my parents couldn't cover it because my father's retirement wasn't what he expected. My mother called me crying and asked if I could help. She said they were desperate and I was their only hope. She said family takes care of family. I asked how much they needed. She said $15,000. I could have paid it easily. I had more than that sitting in a single investment account. But I thought about 18 years of being called stupid. I thought about the confidence my father stole from me. I thought about all the times he dismissed my achievements and celebrated my failures. I thought about the toast at my graduation party. I told my mother I would think about it. Then I called my father directly. I asked him about the situation and he immediately got defensive. He said it wasn't his fault my brother made bad choices. He said the economy was unfair to young people. He said I probably couldn't help anyway since I was always the slow one and probably didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. I let him finish. Then I told him my actual salary. I told him about my condo and my investments and my promotions. I told him I had the money to help, but I wanted to understand something first. I asked why he spent my entire childhood calling me stupid when I clearly wasn't. He got quiet. Then he got angry. He started yelling. His voice went loud and sharp through the phone. He said I was lying about my salary because someone as stupid as me couldn't possibly make that much money. He said I was showing off and trying to make him feel small. He said I was making up numbers to hurt him. He kept repeating that there was no way I made more than he did after 30 years at his company. He said the numbers didn't make sense. He said I must be including benefits or stock options or something that wasn't real money. He said engineers didn't make that much unless they worked for huge companies, and I probably worked for some small place that was lying to me. I let him yell. I sat on my couch and held the phone away from my ear and let him get it all out. When he finally stopped to breathe, I told him I could send him proof. I said I had pay stubs and tax returns and investment statements if he wanted to see them. I said I could forward him my W-2 from last year. The silence on the other end was different from before. It wasn't angry silence. It was the silence of someone realizing they were wrong. I could hear his breathing change. It got slower and heavier. I could picture him sitting in his old recliner with his face getting red. I waited. I didn't fill the silence with more words. I just waited for him to process what I'd said. Then he switched tactics completely. His voice got calmer but not softer. He said the reason he pushed me so hard was because he knew I needed extra motivation to succeed. He said he saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself. He said calling me stupid was his way of lighting a fire under me. He said if he hadn't been so hard on me, I never would have worked hard enough to get where I am now. I laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. The sound came out of my mouth before I could stop it. I asked him to explain how calling me stupid in front of relatives was motivational. I asked him how telling my teachers I was slow helped me succeed. I asked him how laughing when my brother called me names built my confidence. I asked him how missing my college graduation because he said I wouldn't find a job anyway was pushing me toward success. He got quiet again. Then he started talking about how I was taking things out of context. He said I was remembering things wrong. He said I was being too sensitive about things that happened years ago. He said everyone disciplines their kids differently, and I turned out fine, so clearly his methods worked. The phone went dead. He hung up on me. I sat there staring at my phone screen for a few seconds. Then I set it down on the coffee table and put my head in my hands. My phone rang again 50 minutes later. It was my mother. I could hear her crying before she even said hello. She said I had humiliated my father and broken his heart. She said he was sitting in his chair refusing to talk, and she'd never seen him so upset. She said I was being cruel when the family needed help. She said bringing up old history during a crisis was selfish and mean. She said my father had always done his best, and I was punishing him for not being perfect. She said parents make mistakes and children are supposed to forgive them. She said I was holding a grudge over things that happened when I was a child. She said I needed to grow up and let go of the past. She said my brother was in real trouble and I was making everything about me instead of helping family. I told her I would think about helping with the money. But first I needed a real conversation with my father about our history. I said I needed him to acknowledge what he did and how it affected me. I said I needed him to stop pretending he was motivating me when he was actually tearing me down. My mother's crying got louder. She said I was holding the family hostage. She said I was making unreasonable demands during a crisis. She said my father would never agree to talk about the past because it was too painful for him. She said I was being manipulative by using money as leverage. She said this wasn't how family treated each other. She said if I really loved them, I would help without conditions. She said my brother's debt wasn't going to wait while I worked through my childhood issues. She said I was being selfish and vindictive. Then she hung up too. Hannah found me on the couch 2 hours later. I was shaking. My hands were trembling and I couldn't make them stop. She dropped her work bag by the door and came straight to me. She sat down and pulled me against her. I told her everything. I told her about the phone call with my father and the yelling and his ridiculous claim that calling me stupid was motivation. I told her about my mother's call and the crying and the accusations. I told her about the $15,000 and the conditions I'd set. Hannah held me tighter. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just let me talk and shake and cry angry tears about 18 years of being called stupid. When I finally stopped talking, she kissed the top of my head. She said she was proud of me for standing up to them. She said she knew how hard that must have been. Then Hannah said I should talk to someone professional about this before making any final decisions. She said this was too big to handle alone. She reminded me that I had the power now. She said I could use it wisely instead of just reacting from hurt. She said I deserved to process everything with someone who could help me see clearly. She said my parents had spent 18 years messing with my head, and I needed someone neutral to help me untangle it all. I knew she was right. I'd seen a therapist briefly 2 years ago during a stressful work period. His name was Raymond. He'd helped me deal with a difficult project and a boss who kept undermining me. I still had his number in my phone. I called Raymond's office the next morning. The receptionist said he had an opening that afternoon because of a cancellation. I took it. I sat in his office at 3 o'clock and told him everything. I started with being 5 years old and bringing home my first report card. I told him about 18 years of being called stupid. I told him about college and building a life away from my family. I told him about the phone calls and the money and the conditions I'd set. Raymond listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked me what I thought my father's words said about him, not about me. I didn't understand the question at first. He explained that people who constantly tear others down are usually dealing with their own feelings of inadequacy. He said my father's need to call me stupid probably had nothing to do with my actual abilities. He said it was about his own insecurity. He said my success threatened him because it proved he was wrong about me. He said abusive parents often can't handle being proven wrong because it forces them to face what they've done. My phone rang during the drive home from Raymond's office. It was my brother. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pull over and pick up. He didn't wait for me to say hello. He just started apologizing. He said he was sorry for learning to call me stupid when we were kids. He said he knew it was wrong even back then, but our father laughed when he did it, so he kept doing it. He said he'd been thinking about it ever since our mother told him about the phone calls. He said our father destroyed his confidence too. He said it was just in a different way. He said our father constantly compared him to other people's successful children. He said nothing he did was ever good enough either. He said our father told him he was lazy and unmotivated and would never amount to anything. He said he started believing it just like I had. My brother kept talking. He said he got into debt because he kept failing at jobs. He said he'd start something new and our father would make comments about how he'd probably mess it up. He said the criticism made him afraid to try anything challenging. He said he took easy jobs that didn't pay well because he was scared of failing at harder ones. He said he got into credit card debt trying to keep up appearances and prove he was doing okay. He said our father's voice was in his head every time he applied for a better job or tried to do something ambitious. He said he could hear our father saying he wasn't good enough. I sat in my parked car and listened to my brother describe a childhood that sounded different from mine, but damaged him in the same ways. I realized we were both victims of the same toxic parenting. We were just broken in different directions. I was called stupid, so I worked myself nearly to death trying to prove I wasn't. He was called lazy, so he gave up trying because he believed he'd fail anyway. I asked my brother what he really wanted from me besides the money. He went quiet for a few seconds and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. He said he wanted a relationship with his sister. He said he missed having someone who understood what it was like growing up in that house. He said he'd been jealous of me for years because I got out and built something good while he stayed stuck. He said watching me succeed made him feel worse about his own failures. He said our father compared them constantly, and it made him resent me even though he knew it wasn't my fault. He said he was sorry for all of it and he wanted to try again if I'd let him. I told him I needed time to think about everything. He said he understood and thanked me for listening. We hung up and I sat in my car for another 20 minutes just staring at the steering wheel. The call started 3 days later. My mother's sister called first and said she heard about the family situation. She said blood is thicker than water and I should help without making waves. She said my father had his faults, but he was still my father. She said I'd regret it someday if I let pride get in the way of helping family. I thanked her for her opinion and got off the phone as quickly as possible. Then my father's brother called and said basically the same thing. Then my mother's cousin called. Then people I barely remembered from childhood gatherings started leaving voicemails about family loyalty and forgiveness. Some of them were pushy and made me feel guilty. Others were gentler but still pushed the same message. Help your family. Don't hold grudges. Everyone makes mistakes. Be the bigger person. I stopped answering calls from numbers I didn't recognize. But not everyone took my parents' side. My mother's younger sister called on the 5th day, and her tone was different. She asked if I was okay first instead of launching into opinions about what I should do. She asked if I wanted to talk about what happened when I was growing up. I said I didn't know where to start. She said she remembered some of it and she was sorry she never spoke up. She said she tried once to tell my father he was too hard on me, and he stopped talking to her for 6 months. She said my mother begged her to apologize and keep the peace, so she did. She said she regretted it now. Then she told me something I never knew. She said my father's dad treated him the same way. She said my grandfather called my father worthless and said he'd never amount to anything. She said the verbal abuse in our family went back at least 3 generations that she knew of. She said my grandfather learned it from his father, who came from the old country where that kind of treatment was normal. She said it was a cycle that nobody ever broke. She said my father probably didn't even realize he was repeating what was done to him. She said trauma gets passed down like eye color or height unless someone stops it. I thanked her for telling me and said I needed to process it. She said to call her if I needed to talk. She said she was proud of me for standing up for myself. I called Raymond and got an appointment for the next day. I told him about my aunt's revelation and how it complicated everything. I said I understood now that my father was damaged too. I said maybe he couldn't help how he treated me because that's what he learned. Raymond let me talk for a while and then he asked me a question. He asked if understanding where my father's behavior came from changed what it did to me. I said no. He said that was the right answer. He said understanding trauma and abuse patterns is important for context, but it doesn't erase the damage or excuse the behavior. He said my father had choices every single day about how to treat me. He said my father could have recognized the pattern and broken it. He said my father could have gone to therapy or read parenting books or talked to other parents about better ways to motivate kids. He said my father could have apologized the first time he saw how his words affected me. He said my father chose not to do any of those things for 18 years. He said understanding why someone hurt you doesn't mean you have to accept continued hurt or enable their refusal to change. He said I could feel compassion for my father's trauma while still protecting myself from his ongoing toxicity. He said those two things weren't contradictory. I felt something settle in my chest when he said that. I'd been feeling guilty about my anger once I learned about my grandfather. But Raymond helped me see that my father had agency and choices, and he chose to continue the cycle instead of breaking it. My father called 2 weeks after our last conversation. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. His voice sounded different when I picked up. He sounded tired. He said he'd been thinking about our conversation and he wanted to talk. He said maybe he was too hard on me sometimes when I was growing up. He said he didn't mean to hurt me and he was just trying to prepare me for a tough world. He said parents make mistakes and he did his best with what he knew. I waited to see if he'd say more, but that seemed to be it. I asked him if he remembered the toast at my high school graduation party. He said he remembered being proud of me for graduating. I said that wasn't what I asked. I said I asked if he remembered telling a room full of people that I made it through despite my limitations. I said I asked if he remembered suggesting I skip college for a trade because I wasn't cut out for academics. He got quiet. I kept going. I listed other specific memories. I reminded him about telling my teachers I was slow. I reminded him about laughing when my brother called me stupid. I reminded him about dismissing my dean's list achievement by saying they must have curved the grades. I reminded him about skipping my college graduation because he assumed I wouldn't find a job. He interrupted me and said I was exaggerating. He said I was remembering things wrong and making them sound worse than they were. He said he never called me stupid that much and I was being oversensitive. He said lots of parents push their kids and I turned out fine, so obviously his approach worked. I felt my jaw clench. Nothing had actually changed. He still didn't get it. I made him an offer. I said I'd give them $10,000 for my brother's debt directly. I said the other $5,000 was conditional. I said he needed to go to family therapy with me for 6 sessions. I said we'd work with someone who specialized in family dynamics and childhood trauma. I said if he did that and showed genuine effort to understand what he put me through, then I'd give them the rest of the money. I said it wasn't about punishing him. I said it was about making sure this cycle stopped, and we could maybe have an actual relationship instead of the broken thing we had now. The silence stretched for a long time. Then my father started yelling. He said therapy was for crazy people and people with real problems. He said there was nothing wrong with him and I was trying to make him look bad. He said if I really cared about family, I'd help without putting strings on it. He said I was being manipulative and using money to control people. He said my brother needed help now and I was playing games. He said he thought I was smarter than this, but apparently he was wrong. I noticed he was back to insulting my intelligence. I told him the offer stood and he could think about it. He hung up on me. My mother called an hour later. She was crying again. She begged me to just give them the money without conditions. She said my father would never agree to therapy because he didn't believe in it. She said I was punishing the whole family for his pride. She said my brother's situation was getting worse, and they needed the full amount now. She said I was being selfish and cruel. She said she didn't raise me to withhold help from family when I had the means to give it. She said I was breaking her heart. She said she didn't understand how I could be so cold. I let her finish. Then I told her my final decision. I said I'd send my brother $10,000 directly through a bank transfer. I said it would clear his immediate debt. I said I wouldn't give anything more until my father acknowledged the real damage he caused and showed willingness to work on it. I said this wasn't about the money. I said this was about 18 years of systematic emotional abuse that nobody in the family ever acknowledged or stopped. I said I was done pretending it didn't happen just to keep the peace. My mother called me selfish one more time and hung up. I opened my banking app and set up the transfer to my brother's account that same night. I added a note in the transfer memo field. It said I loved him and wanted him to get help for himself, not just because the family needed money. The confirmation screen showed the $10,000 moving from my account to his. I took a screenshot and saved it. My brother texted me 20 minutes later. He said thank you and that he knew this was hard for me. He said he'd been thinking about therapy for a while but was too scared to start. He said knowing I believed in him enough to help gave him the push he needed. He said he'd already looked up therapists in his area and was going to make calls in the morning. I texted back that I was proud of him for taking that step. I meant it. My parents didn't contact me for 3 days after that. When my mother finally called, she didn't mention the money or the therapy condition. She just asked how I was doing in this fake cheerful voice like nothing had happened. I kept my answers short and didn't give her anything real. She eventually stopped calling as often. My father never called at all. I started seeing Raymond twice a week instead of once. We worked through the anger and the hurt and the weird guilty feeling I had about setting boundaries with my family. He helped me understand that I was mourning something I never actually had. I'd been holding on to this idea that someday my parents would see me clearly and apologize, and we'd have a real relationship. Raymond said I needed to grieve that fantasy because it was never going to happen. Some parents don't change. Some parents can't admit they were wrong. Some parents would rather lose their children than face what they did. The grief hit me harder than I expected. I'd cry in my car before work or in the shower where Hannah couldn't hear. She knew anyway. She'd find me staring at nothing and pull me close without asking questions. She'd make dinner on nights when I couldn't function. She'd remind me that choosing myself wasn't selfish even when it felt that way. She'd tell me I was brave for breaking a cycle that had probably gone on for generations in my family. She never once suggested I should just give in and make peace with my parents. She trusted me to know what I needed. My brother called me 6 months later on a Tuesday evening. I almost didn't answer because I was tired and didn't want to deal with family drama. But something made me pick up. He sounded different. Clearer somehow. He said he'd been going to therapy every week since I sent the money. He said he'd gotten a job at a warehouse that wasn't glamorous but paid steady and had benefits. He said he'd been working on understanding why he couldn't hold down jobs before, and it came back to the same thing as me. Our father had convinced him he was worthless too. just in different ways. He said his therapist helped him see that our father's constant comparisons to other people's successful kids made him afraid to try anything because he knew he'd be measured and found lacking. He said he finally felt like he could breathe. Then he asked if we could have dinner sometime. Just the two of us. No parents. He said he wanted to build a real relationship with his sister instead of the broken thing we had growing up. I said yes. We met at a restaurant halfway between our cities 2 weeks later. It felt strange sitting across from him as adults, instead of as the roles our father had assigned us. He looked healthier than I'd seen him in years. We talked about our childhoods honestly for the first time ever. He apologized for calling me stupid when we were kids. I apologized for leaving him alone with our parents when I went to college. We compared notes on the different ways our father had damaged us, and realized we'd both been fighting the same war from different trenches. We agreed to stay in contact separate from our parents. We exchanged real phone numbers instead of just using the family group chat. We made plans to meet again next month. When we hugged goodbye in the parking lot, I felt something shift. I'd spent so long thinking I had to choose between my family and my peace. But I could have my brother without having my parents. I could build something new instead of trying to fix something that was always broken. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. I'd chosen my own worth over their approval, and somehow ended up with more family than I started with, just not the family I was born into. My fiancé's family had a tradition of tearing apart new spouses, and they spent 45 minutes telling everything that is wrong with me. They all went silent when it was my turn to speak. My fiancé's family had a tradition they called the welcome circle. Every time someone new was about to officially join the family through marriage, they held a special dinner. At this dinner, the entire family would take turns telling the newcomer all the things they thought were wrong with them. They called it cleansing. They said it was important to air out concerns before the wedding so there were no secrets and no resentment. They said it helped new family members understand what they needed to work on to truly belong. My fiancé told me about this tradition 3 months before our wedding. His name was Oliver, and we had been together for 3 years. He said the welcome circle was just something his family did, and it wasn't as bad as it sounded. He said everyone went through it and everyone survived. He said his mother went through it when she married his father. His aunts went through it. His brother's wife went through it. He said it would be over in an hour, and then I would officially be accepted. I asked him what happened at his brother's wife's welcome circle. He got quiet and said it was a little rough, but she handled it well. I asked what they said to her. He said they told her she was too loud and laughed too much and didn't know how to dress appropriately for formal occasions. He said they told her she came from a family without class, and she needed to learn how to carry herself better. He said they told her she wasn't smart enough for his brother, and she should read more books. I asked how she reacted. He said she cried a little, but then thanked everyone for their honesty and promised to do better. She's been married to his brother for 6 years now. She barely speaks at family gatherings anymore. I told Oliver I didn't want to do the welcome circle. He said it wasn't optional. He said if I refused, his family would think I had something to hide. He said they would never fully accept me and our marriage would always have tension. He said it was just one night and I should do it for us. I agreed because I loved him and I wanted his family to accept me. Looking back, I should have seen that as the first red flag. The welcome circle was held at his parents' house on a Saturday evening. There were 14 people there. His parents, his grandparents, his brother and sister-in-law, his 2 aunts, 2 uncles, and 4 cousins. They sat in a large circle in the living room with 2 empty chairs in the middle. One for me and one for Oliver. His mother explained the rules. Each family member would share their honest observations about me. I was not allowed to interrupt or defend myself. I was supposed to listen and reflect and thank each person for their honesty when they finished. At the end, I would be given a chance to respond and tell the family how I planned to address their concerns. Then they would vote on whether to officially welcome me. I sat in that chair and listened for 45 minutes. His mother went first. She said I was too independent and didn't seem to value family enough. She said I worked too much and would probably neglect her son. She said my cooking wasn't good enough and Oliver would miss her meals. She said I dressed too casually and needed to put more effort into my appearance. His father said I talked too much about my own opinions and didn't listen enough. He said I seemed to think I was smarter than everyone in the room and that was off-putting. He said my career was fine but not impressive, and I would never be able to provide for Oliver the way he deserved. His grandmother said I was too skinny and needed to eat more. She said my family clearly didn't teach me how to take care of myself. She said I smiled too much and it seemed fake. His grandfather said I didn't seem like the type to raise children properly. He said I seemed selfish and career-focused and probably wouldn't want to stay home with babies. His aunt said I was too quiet at family dinners and didn't make enough effort to get to know everyone. Then they said I was too loud when I did talk and interrupted people. His uncles said I didn't seem to respect Oliver's family history and traditions enough. They said I asked too many questions and should just accept how things were done. His cousins said I was boring and didn't have good enough stories. They said my hobbies were uninteresting and I probably wouldn't fit in at family vacations. His brother said I wasn't as pretty as the other women Oliver had dated, and he was surprised Oliver settled for me. His sister-in-law just stared at the floor and said nothing. I understood why she stayed quiet now. When everyone finished speaking, his mother smiled at me and asked how I planned to address all of their concerns. I looked around the room at these 14 people who had just spent 45 minutes tearing me apart. I looked at Oliver sitting next to me. He hadn't said a word to defend me. He just nodded along like everything they said was reasonable. I smiled back at his mother. Then I addressed each person one by one. I turned to his mother first and kept my voice steady. I told her I cook just fine and work hard because I value my career and I dress for my own comfort and not for her approval. Her mouth opened a little, but nothing came out. I shifted to his father and said my opinions are informed and valuable, and my career is exactly as impressive as it needs to be, and I will never apologize for being educated. His face went red, but he didn't interrupt me. I looked at his grandmother and said, I eat enough and my family taught me to take care of myself just fine, and my smile is genuine when I'm actually happy. She clutched her purse tighter. I told his grandfather I would be an excellent mother if I chose to have children and my career doesn't make me selfish. I addressed the aunts and said I'm exactly as quiet or loud as the situation calls for, and I don't need their approval on how I communicate. The uncles got my attention next, and I told them I respect traditions that deserve respect, and asking questions is how intelligent people learn. I looked at the cousins and said my hobbies interest me, and that's all that matters, and I don't need to perform for their entertainment. Then I turned to his brother and said, I'm exactly pretty enough, and Oliver didn't settle for anything. The whole time Oliver sat frozen next to me with his hands gripped together and his face pale. He didn't say one word to defend me or support me or tell his family they were wrong. He just sat there nodding slightly like he agreed with everything they had said about me. I stood up and the chair scraped against the floor. I looked around at all 14 of them sitting in their circle and I told them I won't be joining this family. I said I refused to marry into a tradition built on tearing people down and making them feel small. His mother started to speak, but I kept going. I told Oliver that any man who would sit silently while his family attacks his partner for 45 minutes isn't someone I can trust with my future. I said I deserve someone who will defend me and stand up for me and protect me from people who want to hurt me. The room went completely silent and everyone stared at me like I had just spoken a different language. I walked toward the door and grabbed my purse from the side table. Nobody moved or said anything, and I could feel all their eyes on my back as I left. I made it to my car before Oliver came running out of the house. He grabbed my arm and spun me around and immediately started talking about how I was overreacting. He said I was embarrassing him in front of his whole family and making a scene over nothing. He claimed the circle was just honesty, and everyone goes through it, and his brother's wife survived just fine. I pulled my arm away and told him his brother's wife doesn't speak anymore at family dinners. He said I was being too sensitive and throwing away 3 years over one difficult evening. He kept talking faster, and his voice got louder, and he said his family was just trying to help me improve myself. I opened my car door and told him that watching him nod along to every insult told me everything I needed to know about who he really is. He reached for the door, but I got in and locked it and started the engine. He was still talking and gesturing as I backed out of the driveway, and his mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear the words anymore. The drive back to my apartment took 20 minutes, and my hands shook on the steering wheel the whole time. I kept replaying the last hour in my head, and seeing Oliver's face as his family destroyed me piece by piece. When I got inside, I made it to the bathroom before my legs gave out. I sat on the cold tile floor and started crying so hard I couldn't breathe right. My whole body shook and tears ran down my face and I couldn't stop. But even through the tears, I felt this weird sense of relief washing over me. It felt like I had just dodged something terrible. I looked down at my engagement ring and the diamond caught the light. I realized I had been making excuses for Oliver's family dynamics for months. There were so many small red flags I ignored because I wanted to believe everything would be okay. His mother's comments about my clothes, his father's dismissive attitude toward my job, the way Oliver always took their side in small disagreements. I twisted the ring on my finger and knew I couldn't wear it anymore. My phone started buzzing in my purse around 10 that night. Oliver was calling and I let it go to voicemail. He called again 5 minutes later and again after that. By midnight, he had called 17 times. The next morning, I woke up to 32 text messages. Some of them were apologies saying he was sorry and he should have defended me. Others were accusations saying I humiliated him and ruined everything. His mother left a voicemail around noon saying I owed the family an apology for my disrespectful outburst. She said they opened their home to me and tried to help me, and I threw it back in their faces. His father sent 3 emails about how I hurt Oliver deeply and damaged the family's trust. The messages kept coming for 3 days straight. Oliver alternated between begging me to come back and telling me I was being ridiculous. His mother sent texts about how I clearly didn't understand the importance of family. I blocked most of their numbers, but I saved every message and voicemail and email. Some instinct told me I might need evidence of their behavior later. On day 4, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said she was the sister-in-law and asked if we could meet for coffee. I almost didn't respond, but something made me say yes. We met at a small place near my apartment and sat in a corner booth away from other people. She looked different from she did at the circle. Her eyes were brighter and she sat up straighter. She told me she had been waiting 6 years for someone to walk out of that room. She said watching me stand up for myself gave her actual chills. Then she started describing who she used to be before the circle. She was loud and funny and confident and always had an opinion about everything. She said Oliver's family spent an hour telling her everything that was wrong with her personality. After the wedding, she started trying to become invisible. She stopped laughing too loud and stopped sharing her thoughts and stopped wearing clothes that stood out. She said she thought if she could just be perfect enough, they would finally accept her. But they never did, and now she barely recognizes herself anymore. Her hands shook a little as she talked, and I realized she was terrified someone would see us together. The practical reality of everything hit me hard the next week. I started calling wedding vendors to cancel, and every single one had a no-refund policy. The venue kept $5,000. The caterer kept $3,000. The photographer kept $1,500. I lost almost $10,000 in deposits, and there was nothing I could do about it. My landlord told me I couldn't break the lease I shared with Oliver without paying a huge penalty. I was stuck paying half the rent on an apartment I couldn't afford alone, while also trying to find a new place to live. My savings account was draining fast, and I had moments of panic at 2 a.m. wondering if I made a huge mistake. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe one bad evening wasn't worth losing everything. But then I would remember Oliver's face as his family tore me apart, and my resolve would get hard again. I started looking at tiny studio apartments I could barely afford, and realized I was about to lose my financial stability over this. Oliver's mother showed up at my workplace on a Tuesday afternoon. I was walking to my car after a long shift, and she was just standing there waiting by my driver's side door. She said we needed to talk, and I clearly didn't understand how important family is. I told her to leave, but she kept talking. She said every marriage requires sacrifice and compromise, and I was being selfish and immature. She said Oliver was willing to forgive me if I would just apologize to everyone and promise to do better. Her voice had this sweet tone that made my skin crawl. I looked her right in the eyes and told her that her tradition is abuse disguised as honesty. I said I will never apologize for having self-respect, and she needs to leave me alone. She looked shocked, like nobody had ever talked to her that way before. She opened her mouth to say something else, but I got in my car and locked the doors. She stood there in the parking lot watching me drive away. I finally told my parents everything that weekend. I drove to their house and sat at their kitchen table and told them about the circle and Oliver's silence and his family's harassment. I told them details I had been hiding for months about how his mother criticized everything I did and how his father dismissed my career constantly. My dad got quiet in that dangerous way where his jaw clenches and his eyes go hard. He said no daughter of his will ever be treated like that, and if Oliver contacts me again, he'll handle it personally. My mom started crying and immediately offered me their guest room and help with moving costs. She said I could stay as long as I needed and they would help me get back on my feet. Having their support after experiencing Oliver's conditional love made something click in my brain. I realized how twisted his family's version of relationships really was. Love wasn't supposed to come with a list of requirements and constant criticism. It was supposed to be unconditional and supportive and safe. 3 weeks after I walked out, Oliver showed up at my apartment with flowers and a prepared speech. I opened the door, and he started talking immediately about how he had been thinking about everything I said. He claimed he talked to his family and they were willing to start over with me. He said we could skip certain traditions and build our own path forward. The flowers were expensive, and he was wearing the shirt I always said I liked. For just a moment, I felt tempted by the familiarity of it all. 3 years is a long time to invest in someone. We had inside jokes and shared memories and a whole life planned together. But then I asked him one question. I asked if he told his family their circle was wrong. He hesitated for maybe 3 seconds, but it was enough. His eyes shifted away from mine, and he started talking about how it's complicated, and they meant well. I handed him back the flowers and told him nothing has actually changed. He tried to argue, but I closed the door while he was still talking. I heard him stand outside for a few minutes before finally leaving. The next morning, I woke up to an email notification on my phone. The sender was an address I didn't recognize, but the subject line said it was from the sister-in-law. I sat up in bed and opened it. The message was long and took me several minutes to read through. She started by apologizing for not speaking up during the welcome circle. She said watching me walk out gave her courage to finally tell someone the truth about Oliver's family. Then she told me something Oliver never mentioned. His brother was married before. The first wife went through the welcome circle just like she did. Just like I was supposed to. That first wife stayed and married into the family 8 years ago. The sister-in-law described how Oliver's mother criticized everything the first wife did. Her cooking was wrong. Her cleaning wasn't good enough. Her career choices were selfish. Her family wasn't good enough. For 2 years, the entire family picked apart every decision she made. They told her she was gaining weight. They said she dressed poorly. They questioned her intelligence constantly. The first wife started having panic attacks. She stopped seeing her friends because Oliver's family said they were bad influences. She quit her job because Oliver's mother convinced her she needed to focus on being a better wife. After 2 years, she finally left. She moved back to her home state, and Oliver's family told everyone she had mental problems. They said she was unstable and couldn't handle being part of a real family. The sister-in-law said she never knew about the first wife until after her own wedding. Oliver's brother casually mentioned it one day like it was no big deal. She realized then that the pattern would repeat with her. And it did. For 6 years, she's been trying to become whatever they want her to be. She said my walking out made her see that she's been slowly disappearing. She thanked me for showing her that leaving was possible. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling sick. Oliver never told me his brother was married before. He never mentioned that another woman went through this exact same thing and it destroyed her. He knew what his family did to people, and he still brought me to that circle. He knew, and he said nothing. I got to work an hour late that morning because I couldn't stop thinking about the email. My boss noticed I seemed distracted during our team meeting. I tried to focus, but my mind kept going back to that first wife and wondering where she was now. Around lunchtime, I realized I had completely forgotten about a client presentation that was due that afternoon. The deadline had been on my calendar for 3 weeks. I always hit my deadlines. Always. But I had been so consumed with the breakup and the apartment search and Oliver's constant messages that I let it slip. I rushed to pull together something, but it wasn't my best work. My boss called me into her office after I submitted it. She closed the door and asked if everything was okay. I told her I was going through a difficult breakup and I was sorry for missing the deadline. She said the work I submitted wasn't up to my usual standards. She said she understood personal problems happen, but I needed to make sure they didn't affect my professional reputation. She was kind about it, but I could see the concern in her face. This job was my career. I had worked so hard to get here and build my reputation. Now I was letting my personal mess destroy everything I had built professionally. I spent that night lying awake wondering if I had made a huge mistake. Maybe I should have just gone through with the wedding. Maybe I should have tried harder to make it work. I had lost my relationship. I was about to lose my apartment. Now I might lose my career too. Standing up for myself was supposed to feel empowering, but instead I just felt terrified that I was throwing away my entire life. 2 days later, my best friend Elena called me sounding angry. She asked if I knew Oliver's brother. I said I had met him a few times at family dinners. She told me he had sent her a long message on social media. She read parts of it to me over the phone. He said he was worried about me. He said I seemed unstable and emotional lately. He suggested that my reaction to the welcome circle was extreme and concerning. He said maybe I needed professional help to deal with my issues. He told Elena that as my friend, she should be concerned about my mental state. He implied that I was having some kind of breakdown, and my friends needed to intervene. He painted the whole situation like I was the problem, like I was crazy for walking out, like there was something wrong with me for refusing to accept their tradition. Elena was furious. She had already screenshotted everything and sent it to me before calling. She told him to never contact her again and blocked him immediately. But I realized what they were doing. They were trying to isolate me. If they could convince my friends that I was unstable, then I would have no support system. They wanted everyone to think I was the problem, so nobody would believe my side of what happened. It was calculated and cruel. I saved all the screenshots in a folder on my computer. Some part of me knew I might need evidence of their behavior later. The apartment search became urgent after that. I couldn't stay in the place I shared with Oliver. Every corner reminded me of the life I thought we were building. I looked at places I could barely afford on my salary alone. Most were too expensive or in bad neighborhoods or required income I didn't have. I finally found a tiny studio apartment across town. It was smaller than my bedroom at Oliver's place. The kitchen was just a hot plate and a mini fridge. The bathroom was so small I could barely turn around. But it was mine and I could afford it if I was careful with money. I signed the lease and put down the deposit. It took almost all my savings. I scheduled the move for a day when Oliver would be at work. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to hear him try to convince me to stay. My dad drove over with his truck to help me move. We packed up my stuff while Oliver was gone. My clothes and books and the few pieces of furniture that were actually mine. It didn't take long. I realized how little of that apartment was really mine. Most of the furniture was Oliver's. Most of the kitchen stuff belonged to his mother, who had given it to us. I had been living in a space that never felt like home. My dad loaded everything into his truck without saying much. When we finished, he looked at me and said he was proud of me for choosing myself. He didn't say I told you, so even though he had never liked Oliver's family, he just helped me carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs to my new studio and told me I could always come home if I needed to. 2 months after the welcome circle, I stopped at my usual coffee shop on the way to work. I was standing in line waiting to order when I saw Oliver sitting at a table by the window. My heart started beating fast and my hands got sweaty. I thought about leaving, but he had already seen me. He stood up and walked over. He asked if we could talk for a minute. I said I only had a few minutes before work. We sat down at his table and he started talking about how much he missed me. He said he had been thinking about everything that happened. He asked if there was any chance we could try again. I looked at him sitting across from me and realized something strange. He looked smaller somehow. Less important. 2 months ago, the thought of losing him made me feel like my world was ending. Now I just felt tired and a little sad. Sad for the relationship I thought we had that never actually existed. Sad for the time I wasted trying to fit into his family. But I didn't feel the pull I expected. I didn't want to reach across the table and hold his hand. I didn't want to hear about how much he missed me. I just wanted to get my coffee and go to work. I told him I hoped he was doing okay, but I needed to go. He tried to say something else, but I stood up and walked to the counter. I ordered my coffee and left without looking back. The whole interaction took maybe 5 minutes. I realized during my drive to work that I was going to be fine. That afternoon, the sister-in-law called me crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said she finally told her husband she wanted marriage counseling. She said she couldn't keep living the way they had been living. She needed help dealing with how his family treated her. He refused immediately. He said she was influenced by me. He called me a bad influence who was trying to destroy their family. He said if she kept talking to me, he would have serious concerns about their marriage. She was terrified, but she was also determined. She said she couldn't go back to being silent after finding her voice again. She said watching me walk away showed her that she deserved better too. She asked if I regretted leaving Oliver. I told her the truth. I said the first few weeks were awful and scary, and I questioned everything. But now I felt lighter than I had in years. I felt like myself again. She cried harder and said she didn't know if she was strong enough to leave. I told her she didn't have to decide anything right now. She just needed to keep being honest about what she needed. We talked for almost an hour. When we hung up, I realized that walking away from Oliver's family wasn't just about saving myself. It was about showing her that leaving was possible. That she didn't have to spend the rest of her life disappearing to make other people comfortable. 3 days later, my mom called to say a letter had been delivered to their house addressed to me. She asked if she should open it or bring it over. I told her to open it and read it to me. It was from Oliver. A long handwritten letter that my mom said was at least 4 pages. She started reading and I could hear the anger building in her voice. Oliver wrote that he had been doing a lot of thinking. He said he realized how much his family's opinion meant to him, but he was willing to make a sacrifice for us. He said he would cut off his entire family if I would take him back. He said we could move to a different city and start fresh without them. He made it sound like he was offering me this huge gift. But the whole letter was full of guilt trips. He kept saying how much he was willing to sacrifice. He said I was forcing him to choose between his family and me. He said no other woman had ever made him feel this conflicted. He wrote about how hard this decision was for him, and how much it would hurt to lose his family. Every sentence made it clear that he resented having to pick. He was offering to cut them off, but he wanted me to know what it was costing him. He wanted me to feel guilty for making him choose. My mom finished reading and asked what I wanted her to do with it. I told her to throw it away. I didn't need to respond. Oliver was still trying to manipulate me into feeling responsible for his choices. He hadn't learned anything. He still didn't understand that the problem wasn't just his family. The problem was him and his inability to stand up for what was right. I called my friend who works as a lawyer and asked her advice about getting Oliver and his family to stop contacting me. She said I should send a formal cease and contact letter. She offered to write it for me for free, but I insisted on paying her something. It cost me $300 I didn't really have, but it felt necessary. The letter went to Oliver and his parents and his brother. It said they needed to stop all communication with me immediately. It said any further contact would be considered harassment. It mentioned the messages to Elena and the voicemails from his mother and the letter to my parents' house. It said I was documenting everything in case I needed legal protection later. My friend sent it certified mail so we would have proof they received it. She told me to keep records of any contact that happened after they got the letter. I felt better having that boundary in place even though it cost money I couldn't afford. At least now there was a legal record that I had asked them to leave me alone. 3 months after walking out of the welcome circle, I made an appointment with a therapist. I knew I needed help understanding why I almost married into that family. I needed to figure out what made me ignore so many warning signs. The first session was hard. The therapist asked me to describe my relationship with Oliver from the beginning. As I talked, I started seeing patterns I hadn't noticed before. How he always made plans without asking my opinion first. How he would get quiet and distant when I disagreed with him. How he expected me to spend every holiday with his family, but never made time for mine. The therapist said I had been taught to be accommodating. She said I saw love as something you earn through sacrifice instead of something freely given. She said that made me vulnerable to Oliver's family dynamics. Over the next few weeks, we worked on understanding why I stayed so long. Why I agreed to the welcome circle even though everything in me said it was wrong. She helped me see that I had been taught to value other people's comfort over my own well-being. She said learning to recognize my own worth independent of anyone else's approval would take time. The sessions were expensive and hard, but I kept going. I was learning things about myself that I needed to know. 4 months after the breakup, my boss called me into her office again. I felt my stomach drop, thinking I was about to get fired for that missed deadline. Instead, she told me I was getting a promotion. She said I had successfully completed a major project, and my work over the past few months showed real resilience and focus. The promotion came with a raise. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to make my studio apartment affordable without help from my parents. She said she had been impressed by how I handled the difficult period after my breakup. She said I had proven I could separate my personal life from my professional responsibilities. I walked out of her office feeling genuinely proud of myself for the first time since everything fell apart. I had survived the worst few months of my life and come out stronger. I was building a life that was completely mine. A life based on my own values and choices instead of trying to fit into someone else's expectations. That night, I sat in my tiny studio apartment eating takeout and watching my favorite show that Oliver always complained about. I looked around at the space I had decorated exactly how I wanted. I thought about my job and my friends and my family who supported me unconditionally. I realized I was actually happy. Not the anxious happiness I felt with Oliver, where I was always worried about doing something wrong. Real happiness that came from being completely myself without apology. I found out through a mutual friend who ran into Oliver's mother at the grocery store. She mentioned it casually, like she was sharing gossip about the weather. Oliver's parents were telling everyone who would listen that I had some kind of breakdown and canceled the wedding for no real reason. They were saying I got cold feet and panicked, that I overreacted to normal family bonding. My friend asked if I wanted her to set the record straight, and I almost said yes. Part of me wanted to defend myself, to make sure everyone knew what really happened in that living room. But then I realized something that felt like freedom. Their opinion didn't actually matter anymore. The people who really knew me understood the truth without me having to explain it. Everyone else wasn't my problem or my concern. I had spent 3 years trying to make Oliver's family like me, and now I was finally done caring what they thought. 2 weeks later, I was eating lunch in the break room at work when a coworker sat down across from me. She was engaged and planning her wedding for next spring. She started talking about her future in-laws and mentioned they had some interesting traditions for welcoming new family members. The way she said it made my stomach drop. I asked her what kind of traditions, trying to keep my voice casual. She described something that sounded way too familiar. A special dinner where the family would share honest feedback to help her become a better wife. She laughed nervously and said it sounded weird, but her fiancé promised it was just their way of showing they cared. I put down my sandwich and looked at her directly. I told her I had been in a similar situation and it didn't end well. Over the next hour, I shared a carefully edited version of the welcome circle, watching her face change as she recognized the warning signs in her own relationship. She went quiet for a long time after I finished talking. Then she asked me how I knew it was time to leave. I told her the truth. When the person who claims to love you sits silently while others tear you apart, that tells you everything you need to know. 2 weeks after that conversation, she stopped by my desk to thank me. She said she had been thinking about everything I told her and decided to reconsider the relationship. She said she talked to her fiancé about changing the tradition, and he refused, said she was influenced by negative people. She realized if he couldn't stand up for her before the wedding, he never would after. I felt terrible that she was going through pain, but also relieved that maybe my awful experience helped someone else avoid the same mistake. 4 months after I walked out of that living room, I was sitting in my studio apartment on a Friday night. I had ordered Chinese takeout and was watching a crime documentary that Oliver always complained was too depressing. My apartment was small, but I had decorated it exactly how I wanted, with bright colors and plants and artwork that made me happy. I was wearing sweatpants and an old college shirt with no makeup on. I realized as I sat there eating noodles straight from the container that I was genuinely happy. Not the anxious kind of happy I felt with Oliver, where I was always monitoring my behavior and managing his moods. This was different. This happiness came from being completely myself without worrying about meeting impossible standards or fixing things that were wrong with me. I didn't have to cook fancy meals or dress up or pretend to enjoy his family's company. I could just exist as myself, and that was enough. The thought made me smile into my takeout container. I started building a life where people celebrated me instead of trying to change me. My parents called every week just to check in and tell me they were proud of how strong I was being. My best friend came over most weekends, and we would cook together and watch movies and talk about everything except Oliver. At work, I was thriving because I could focus all my energy on projects instead of relationship drama. I got assigned to lead a new team, and my boss said she chose me because I had proven I could handle pressure and come out stronger. I even started dating again, though I was much more careful this time. I paid attention to red flags I would have ignored before. When a guy I went out with made a joke about his mother knowing best about everything, I ended it after 2 dates. When another one talked over me at dinner, I didn't give him a second chance. I had learned that I deserved someone who would defend me, not someone who would sit silently while others attacked me. The sister-in-law texted me sometimes with updates. She started going to counseling and setting boundaries with her husband's family. She said it was hard, but she was remembering who she used to be before the welcome circle broke her down. Walking away from Oliver and his family was the hardest thing I ever did. It cost me 3 years of my life, thousands of dollars in wedding deposits, and the future I thought I wanted. But it taught me something more valuable than any of that. It taught me that I was strong enough to choose myself, even when it meant losing everything I thought I needed. I learned to trust my own judgment instead of second-guessing every instinct. I built a life based on my own values instead of trying to fit into someone else's twisted idea of family. And that was worth more than any acceptance from people who thought love meant tearing each other down. My future mother-in-law threatened to boycott our wedding over a prenup. I let her boycott herself right out of our lives. I built my company from nothing when I was 23 years old. I started with a small online business selling handmade jewelry and grew it into a brand that now operates in 12 countries. By the time I was 30, I had more money than I ever imagined possible. I bought my parents a house. I paid off my sister's student loans. I invested wisely and watched my wealth multiply. Everything I had came from my own hands and my own ideas and years of sleepless nights building something real. I met my fiancé Graham at a charity event 2 years ago. He worked as a high school teacher and made a modest salary that he loved because he genuinely cared about educating kids. He had no idea who I was when we started talking. He just thought I was a woman in a nice dress who laughed at his terrible jokes. We exchanged numbers and went on a date that weekend. I didn't tell him about my money until our third date because I wanted to make sure he liked me for me. When I finally explained what I did and how successful the company had become, he looked surprised but not interested in the way I'd seen from other men. He didn't ask how much I was worth. He didn't suddenly start suggesting expensive restaurants. He just said that was impressive and asked if I wanted to split the check like we'd been doing. I knew then that Graham was different. We dated for 18 months before he proposed with a ring he saved for over a year to afford. It wasn't expensive by my standards, but it meant everything because he earned every penny himself. I said yes immediately, and we started planning our wedding. That's when I met his mother Opal and everything got complicated. Opal was pleasant enough during our first few meetings. She asked about my work, and I kept things vague because I didn't want to make a big deal about the money. She knew I owned a business, but I don't think she understood the scale until she visited my house for the first time. I live in a gated community in a 5-bedroom home with a pool and a view of the mountains. When Opal walked through the front door, her entire demeanor changed. She started asking very specific questions. She asked how much the house cost. She asked if I owned it outright or had a mortgage. She asked about my investments and my retirement accounts and my future plans for the business. I answered politely but briefly. I didn't like where this was going. After that visit, Opal became intensely interested in the wedding. She offered to help plan everything. She suggested vendors and venues and caterers. Every suggestion happened to be the most expensive option available. She said her son deserved the best, and since I could clearly afford it, why not go all out? I told her Graham and I wanted something simple and meaningful. She said simple was code for cheap and people would talk. When I mentioned the prenup to Graham, he understood completely. He said he'd sign whatever made me comfortable because he wasn't marrying me for money. He said he'd been poor his whole life and planned to keep working regardless of what I had. He said protecting what I built before we met was just common sense. I loved him even more for that response. Opal had a very different reaction. Graham made the mistake of mentioning the prenup during a family dinner. Opal put down her fork and stared at me like I'd insulted her entire bloodline. She asked if I didn't trust her son. I said I trusted him completely, but this was standard practice when one partner had significant assets. She said standard practice was for celebrities and billionaires who thought they were better than everyone else. She asked if I thought I was better than her family. I said this had nothing to do with being better. I said I built my company before I met Graham, and I wanted to protect it the same way I would protect any business asset. The dinner ended badly. Opal didn't speak to me when we left. Graham apologized the whole drive home and promised to talk to her. He said she'd come around once she understood the prenup wasn't about distrust. She didn't come around. She got worse. Opal called me directly the next week and said she would not attend our wedding if we signed a prenup. She said no mother should have to watch her son marry someone who already planned for their divorce. She said Graham deserved someone who would share everything with him unconditionally. I told her the prenup was happening regardless of her feelings. She said then she wouldn't be at the wedding. She hung up before I could respond. Graham was devastated. Opal was demanding I risk everything I'd built to prove my love to a woman who'd known me for less than a year. I decided to call her bluff. I told Graham we should proceed with the wedding exactly as planned. Prenup included. If his mother wanted to boycott, that was her choice. He agreed reluctantly. We sent out invitations. We booked the venue. We arranged catering and flowers and music. We did everything without Opal's input since she'd made it clear she wasn't participating. Opal assumed I would crack under pressure. She told Graham's sister that I would come crawling back once I realized how serious she was. She told relatives she was standing on principle, and I would eventually see reason. She waited for me to call and beg her to come to the wedding. I never called. 2 weeks before the wedding, Opal reached out to Graham asking for an update on the prenup situation. He told her we signed it last month. She exploded. My phone started vibrating before we even got home from signing the prenup. 6 voicemails appeared while Graham drove us back to my house. He parked in the driveway and we sat there staring at my phone screen lighting up with notifications. Text messages followed the voicemails. A dozen of them in rapid succession. Graham's face went pale when I opened the first one. The words gold digger jumped out at me in all caps. I scrolled through the rest while Graham sat frozen in the passenger seat. Each message got worse. She called me manipulative and calculating. She said I trapped her son with money and fake love. She demanded I call her immediately to discuss fixing this disaster before it was too late. Graham reached for my phone, but I pulled it back. I needed to hear the voicemails myself. I put the phone on speaker and pressed play on the first one. Opal's voice came through shaky with anger. She said she couldn't believe we went behind her back like sneaky children. She said Graham was making the biggest mistake of his life. The second voicemail was louder. She said I thought I was better than everyone because I had money. The third one called me a user who saw Graham as beneath me. The fourth accused me of planning our divorce before we even got married. The fifth said no real woman would do this to the man she loved. The sixth was just her crying and saying she raised Graham better than this. Graham looked like he might throw up. His hands shook when he finally took my phone and typed out a text to his mother. He showed it to me before sending. It said we weren't changing anything and she needed to decide if she was coming to the wedding or not. He hit send and turned off my phone completely. The next morning, Isabella called Graham while he was making coffee in my kitchen. I heard his phone ring from where I sat at the counter checking work emails. He answered and put it on speaker without thinking. Isabella's voice came through thick with tears. She said Opal had been calling every family member since yesterday. She was telling everyone I forced Graham to sign the prenup by threatening to leave him. She painted me as this rich woman who thought I was too good for their family. She said I was trying to control Graham with my money and make him dependent on me. Isabella kept apologizing between sobs. She said she tried to tell people it wasn't true, but Opal was so convincing. Graham's face went red. He grabbed his phone off the counter and started pacing across my kitchen. He called his aunt first. I could hear him explaining that the prenup was his idea as much as mine. His voice got defensive even though he was telling the truth. He called his uncle next. Same conversation. Same defensive tone. He called 3 cousins after that. Each call sounded more tired than the last. I watched him wear himself down trying to correct his mother's lies. By the time he hung up from the 5th call, he looked exhausted and defeated. His cousin called back an hour later. Then his uncle. Both of them said maybe Graham should reconsider the prenup since it was causing so much family drama. They said weddings were supposed to bring families together, not tear them apart. His cousin said if I really loved Graham, I should trust him enough to share everything. His uncle said the prenup made it look like I was planning for failure instead of believing in the marriage. Neither of them seemed to understand that the prenup protected assets I built before Graham and I even met. Graham defended our decision both times. He explained about my company and the years I spent building it. He said the prenup was just smart business practice, but I could see the weight of family pressure crushing him. He hung up from the second call and sat down on my couch with his head in his hands. His shoulders slumped forward. He stared at the floor without saying anything for 10 minutes. I texted Juliet that afternoon about the family explosion. She showed up at my door 3 hours later with 2 bottles of wine and Thai food from our favorite restaurant. We sat on my back patio while I told her everything. The voicemails, the text messages, the family phone tree of lies, the calls pressuring Graham to reconsider. Juliet listened to all of it and then she laughed. Not a mean laugh, but the kind that cuts through nonsense. She said Opal was playing a classic power move. She was trying to establish dominance before the wedding by testing if she could control major decisions. Juliet took a sip of wine and said Opal saw me as a resource to be accessed rather than a person to respect. That hit me hard because it was exactly right. Opal didn't care about Graham's happiness or our relationship. She cared about what she could get from my money and my success. Juliet said if I gave in now, Opal would never stop pushing boundaries. She would spend our entire marriage trying to manipulate and control us through guilt and family pressure. The wedding planner called the next morning. Her voice sounded stressed when I answered. She said the florist received a call yesterday from someone claiming to be me. The caller requested cancellation of all our flower orders. The florist almost processed it before deciding to double-check with the wedding planner first. I felt my stomach drop. I immediately realized Opal was sabotaging our vendors. I spent the next 2 hours calling everyone. The caterer, the venue coordinator, the photographer, the DJ. I confirmed all our orders were still active. I established password protection for any future changes. Each vendor needed to hear a specific code word from either me or Graham before making any modifications. The caterer said someone had called them too, asking about reducing the guest count. The venue coordinator said they got an inquiry about canceling our date. Graham came home from the school that afternoon and found me still on the phone with vendors. I told him what his mother did. He looked horrified. His face went white and he sat down hard on the nearest chair. But I was just angry. I was angry that Opal was stooping to petty sabotage instead of having an honest conversation about her feelings. Leonardo called Graham 2 days later asking if we could all meet for dinner. He said he wanted to talk through this situation calmly before the wedding. Graham agreed immediately. I could see hope in his eyes that his father might make Opal see reason. I went along with it even though I knew it was pointless. We met at a restaurant downtown on a Thursday evening. Leonardo and Opal were already seated when we arrived. Opal wouldn't look at me. She stared at her menu like it contained the secrets of the universe. Leonardo tried to make small talk about Graham's students and my business. Nobody engaged. The waiter took our orders and disappeared. Leonardo cleared his throat and launched into his mediation attempt. He said both sides had valid concerns. He said maybe we could find a middle ground that made everyone comfortable. He suggested I could put Graham's name on the house as a gesture of good faith, or give him access to one business account to show I trusted him. He talked for an hour about compromise and family unity and starting our marriage on the right foot. I waited until he finished. Then I explained that the prenup protected my company and assets I built over 7 years before meeting Graham. Adding Graham's name to anything would completely defeat that purpose. The prenup wasn't about trust. It was about protecting something I created with my own work before Graham was even part of my life.